Now it's time to measure and mix your epoxy resin. Now, the first question we have to ask is, what is epoxy resin? And epoxy resin is basically a two-component part of chemical substances that contains part A, which is resin, and it's a liquid plastic, and part B, which is the hardener, the component that actually solidify the resin, because resin does not cure on its own and it needs a hardener, part B, to solidify and become hard plastic. So basically you have to measure equal amounts of the components found in each of these two containers, part A and part B, together in order for them to solidify and cure out a solid plastic. This is part A, the resin, and this is part B, the hardener. Now, there is no good and bad brands of epoxy resin. The preferences that one artist would make is dependent on the project they are working on. For the sake of this video, we're making a geode resin artwork. So what you'll need is a resin that is designed for arts, crafts, and coatings applications. Now we're about to mix our epoxy resin, and for our epoxy resin, we're using 1:1 epoxy resin ratio. This is the most convenient, the easiest ratio to start with as a beginner, because all you need is to mix equal measurements of both parts. For example, we'll need for this artwork 100 milliliters of epoxy resin. So we're going to split that 100 in half, 50 of part A resin and 50 of part B hardener. That is, we're measuring 1:1 ratio in volumes using a measuring cup. So it's always recommended to avoid measuring in weights because it is more prone to error. You get to add way more of the hardener than you want to add due to the different weights of the two parts. So generally speaking, keep your measurements in volumes to avoid these errors. Having accurate measurements for your epoxy resin is very, very important and crucial. Any slight diversions of the actual measurements may result with errors to your own pour, like having uncured artworks, like wet artworks, resin that does not cure because the measurements are incorrect, like having more hardener or less hardener, or more resin or less resin. So this measurement is very sensitive, and so you gotta make sure that you measure them very well. And that's why we always go with volumes to avoid issues like these. Okay, so we added our first part A of the resin into our measuring cup, and we measured in this clip about 30 milliliters of part A, the resin. And now on top of that, we're going to add the same amount of part B, the hardener, that is 30 milliliters, which is going to equal to 60 milliliters of both parts. Now you can measure both parts in two separate cups and then you can mix them together later on. But for us, we like to do it all in one cup. We add resin first, always resin first because it's heavier. And then we add on top of it the hardener, in both in the same amount when it comes to 1:1 ratios. Milliliters by 30 milliliters equaling to 60 milliliters, and the next step is to start mixing our epoxy resin. And just a quick reminder that whenever you're measuring and mixing your resin or working with your resin, on a general note, you've got to be wearing your gloves, goggles, and a full mask, perhaps your respiratory mask, and preferably you're wearing long sleeve to protect your skin. And you should be working in a well-ventilated area away from pets and children and any other vulnerable individuals. Back to epoxy resin. So whenever you're looking to get your epoxy resin kit, you gotta pay attention to the features. That is the application, the working time, the temperature, viscosity, the other features, physical features and chemical features. Also make sure that you read the data sheets, that is the safety, the precautions, the side effects, what's the chemicals that are used in that specific epoxy resin, the appearance, we talked about that. And yeah, so any other features that they would include in their description or in their data sheet, make sure that you read it well before you get your epoxy resin kit, so that you know very well what you're getting. So yeah. Now, the most important feature to look for when buying your epoxy resin kit is the application. So what is it designed for? Is it designed for river tables? Is it designed for coatings, arts, crafts, castings? So make sure that you look over that, and the resin kit you're going to get will be pretty much dependent on the projects you're going to be working on. As for the other features, they are good to learn about when you're working with resin. For example, the working time. It's important to know the working time of your epoxy resin so that you don't miss on that, and you may end up with cured resin before you even pour it on your projects. Most of the time, resins have 30-minute-ish of working time. After that, the resin becomes very sticky and hard to work with. Other features like temperature, resin may cure faster in hotter temperatures and may cure slower in colder temperatures. So it's important to note these features to work around your resin in a proper way. When it comes to mixing your resin, it is not about time or like how long you mix it for. It is about how well you mix it for. So make sure that you scrape the walls of your cup and the bottom of your cup very well, and you mix it very well until your mixture become homogeneous. That is, you don't feel like they are still separated. They are a homogeneous mixture. Things to look for is clarity of your resin, so no fogginess, no stripes in your resin. Should know that your resin has been mixed very well, but try to mix it as good as possible so that you don't end up with errors like having uncured resin on your own projects. Oftentimes when projects don't cure out, it is because we did not mix the epoxy resin very well, or we had issues with the measurements. And that's how you measure and mix your epoxy resin. The next step is to actually pour it on your canvas, and we're going to do that in the next lectures. If you do have any questions regarding the use of epoxy resin or anything related to it, don't hesitate to ask us. We'll be very happy to answer you. And that's about it for this lecture. I'll see you in the next lectures. Thank you for watching. Bye.